Hello, everyone. Good morning, and we welcome all of you to our Bible study this morning, October 26th, 2019. We are recording from the North Star Cottage this morning, and it's the United States of America. We're glad you're here, New Jersey. So this morning, our moderator is Shardy from Pennsylvania.
Good morning. Shall I start with the quote?
Please.
Quote, and this is from Notes from a Class as Taught by Laura Sargent. Quote, law as used in the Bible. His delight is in the law of the Lord. Psalm. The law of the Lord is the fullness of the activity of divine principle. The commandments are an intermediary state towards obedience, but not the full revelation. When Jesus gave the commandment, be ye perfect, he attached no penalty. This commandment is conceived from the standpoint of divine mind itself and is of the greatest importance. Think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Matthew. I am come to fulfill the law. I am come to reveal the operation of divine principle. Sergeant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments on that?
Well, I think that says a lot, that the whole point of obeying the commandments, put ourselves in the frame of mind to obey the law. And the law was revealed more fully by Jesus in the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, and again more fully by Mary Baker Eddy when she brought us the Comforter, the science of Christianity.
I get a sense of mercy in it. In other words, something showing us the way for us to deserve the love of God. If we obey these laws, then we naturally have the good, the benefit that comes from that obedience, the peace, the right way of living, right way of thinking, etc. It's for our benefit, in other words.
Thank
Exactly.
you, yes.
Be ye perfect. That means it's expected and it's doable. That's what I like.
That's very good, because I've often struggled with this commandment, be ye perfect, and it's like, whoa, me? But the last sentence where it says, it reveals the operation of divine principle. There's no way on earth that I can be perfect on my own. But if I get myself out of myself and do the best I can to let God work through me, then this operation of divine principle will reveal the perfection.
Thank you. In reading Laura Sargent, she likes to come from the standpoint of that, of reflection of our oneness with God. I'll never forget what she said about gratitude. You know, we talk about being grateful, expressing gratitude. And she writes that, you know, when you're in that right mind, you will be overwhelmed with gratitude. In other words, it's a state of being. So the commandments are a more relative type of thing, you know. You're being commanded to do these things, while what Christ Jesus taught was more of the absolute. It's a state of being our oneness with God. And as we do that, yes, all good things come, they pour forth. It's the fruit of the Spirit, as we've talked about. But it is a state of being, a state of oneness with God. And then when we do that, we will naturally, we will reflect our oneness. We couldn't possibly disobey a commandment, nor could we possibly be ungrateful. And that's what's so wonderful about putting off the old man for the new, because it's a divine state of being.
Thank you. I was thinking about the observation that he attached no penalty. I think we already know what the penalty is for being imperfect. I certainly myself, I have a lot of ideas of things that went wrong along the way. So I'm happy to be working towards this. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Unless anyone has more to say about thou shalt not steal, we'll move right on to commandment number 9.
I was just going to say on the forum, Mike wrote quite a bit about that. I don't know. This might be a good place for you to speak to that if you'd like to, Mike.
Well, yes, and you can cut me off if I get too lengthy on it.
Yeah, we don't want to spend all morning on this one.
I
So.
know. So the bottom line is that what I've realized is that a lot of stealing is kind of institutionalized, if that's the correct word, because the government looks the other way. The people in power use it as a way of subjugating. And specifically, I saw this clip on 60 Minutes about dairy farmers and these two sisters in Pennsylvania milking 1,050 cows. To put that in perspective, my sister and I made a living on 30 cows. They're losing $2 for every 100 pounds of milk that they sell, which comes to about $1,000 a day. And over a year, that's a lot of money that they're losing, and how they keep going is a mystery. But everybody that's supposed to be working towards helping them and protecting them, like the cooperative they belong to, the government, I mean, even the processors shouldn't be cheating them because they're making fine money when they sell the finished product. And it's just a tangled web of stealing. And the other thing is that then when they go to hire people, they can't afford to pay them, so they're stealing from the people that they're hiring.
Oh, what a wicked web we weave. Whatever that's called.
But the good news is that the book of Nehemiah actually echoes that whole thing, and I even found something fascinating this morning just in Smith's Bible commentary, dictionary, is that when Nehemiah came back, when he begged the king to let him go back to Jerusalem to rebuild it, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Gershom, I believe it was, were opposing him. And it turns out that Sanballat was actually a officer in under Arcturus. So Nehemiah was his wine taster and a confidant, advisor to the king. And he got the king's blessing to come back, and then he was opposed by one of the king's other people. But then the interesting thing is that Sanballat was, through grandchildren and such, was actually tied in with and married into the family of the high priest, who was enslaving, and that whole system was enslaving Jewish people because they couldn't afford to keep their land, and they got into debt, and then they'd have to sell their children into bondage. But the nice thing is that Nehemiah was able to rectify all that. And that's such a wonderful, grateful thing for me to see, that God will correct all this, because human people don't seem to be doing it.
Well, that's it. That's the fun one. What were you going to say, Florence?
No, the same thing. That's why our help is from God. That's it.
Yeah. And you see all the human systems, as Gary's given a testimony about that, they're all doomed to fail, all of them. eventually. And, I've also heard, and the vegans would argue this, I mean, the milk farmers aren't doing so well because everyone's drinking oat milk and almond milk, and they're not working not to rely on animals for these things. So this is all overturning, changing, and unwinding snarls that have been, yes, the word is instituted, probably for many, many years and generations. So, and the ultimate is that God's word, God's plumb line will come down and correct all of these injustices. So if there's anyone else on that, otherwise we'll go on to the next.
We'll start with, or go on to, the commandment number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor.
Well, I looked up the word false in the 1828, and some of the definitions were not solid, deceiving, not honest, not just, unfaithful, treacherous, counterfeit, hypocritical, feigned, and made for the purpose of deception. And not any of them good states of mind.
Thank you.
I know when I read this commandment, it made me ask myself, if I look at my neighbor, am I seeing the image and likeness of God? Or am I forming judgments? So it made me want to not be so judgmental. Do the best I can to uphold the perfect image and likeness of God in those that I see.
And you see that again, that's the ultimate of bearing false witness. And we all are guilty of not doing that, and perhaps worse things, because we all need to be constantly turning it back to God and seeing our neighbor as God's image and likeness.
And that's what it means to love thy neighbor as thyself. When you see yourself as God's image and likeness, and you respect that, and then you see your neighbor as God's image and likeness.
I think only science really explains this, because if there's only one infinite all, then it's only one. We have to always turn it back to God for the good of everyone, because there's only one. I appreciate that understanding from the scientific view of this.
Yeah, because ultimately, if you're bearing false witness against your neighbor, who are you kidding? You can't kid God.
Right.
And if it's true for them, then it can be true for you.
Exactly.
And it is what that one, you point one finger and at someone, and what 5 turn back on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is the sin, if you will, of competitiveness, isn't it? To think that there's a limited amount of good and you've got to take from somebody else in order to have enough for yourself. You've got to degrade, if you will, your neighbor to build yourself up. This is all, it's all a false sense of God and of man as his creation.
One of the things I found really interesting, I don't remember what word or what I was looking up, but I was surprised that almost the first couple of pages of Google, I don't think it was Google, but at least in the search engine, almost everything to click on was justifying lying. It was incredible how much there was in defense or saying it wasn't really a big deal, or it was really quite interesting.
Shows where they're coming from.
Yes, well, thank you. And every time we have one of these times with the commandments, I always think this is definitely the most important one. Because right now, with the internet, all of this stuff that comes out, And very much of it is not fact checked, or I call it, I'm thinking about it like personal truths, what one person thinks is true and what someone else thinks is true. And it's something, definitely we need this plumb line to come down on us. And all this, some things popped up on my phone this morning before I came that were, ruining a person's reputation. All of this that I have been studying about the last few days, a pop-out headline, and I did not believe the headline to be true about this person. I thought it was bearing false witness. And yet, I don't know how many other people would have seen that headline and just, oh yeah, wow, look at that. It was about talking about somebody's downfall, and everyone accepting it as true. I mean, it's right now, the only way I can sort things out is I try to work to find out reputable sources, whether it's a newspaper or some other source that I feel fact checks. Usually it's Christian, because I feel they have to obey this commandment. We all do, but Christians are usually very much aware that they must, and then tend to go with that. But more importantly, what does my spiritual sense say about the headline or the news? And what is God saying about this? And we have to be so careful. And that, thank you, Linda, because that's true. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter. People are lying through their teeth. You know, it used to be, if you were in court, tell the truth, the whole truth,
And nothing but the truth.
So help us
so help
God.
me God.
Yeah,
Help me God. Remember my
So what happened? All of a sudden, the truth doesn't matter anymore. That's not right, as you're saying.
that
Not.
is right.
It
That's why,
cannot be.
again, this commandment is so important. And most of the commentaries I read said, yeah, it's not about bearing false witness, but it's also thou shalt not lie. And that is bearing false witness. And it ultimately, the answer is what Bruce and Gary talked about, seeing the perfect man and also loving your neighbor as yourself. Those are the golden rules. Those are the what Christ taught us, because Christ summed up all these commandments in that. To love God and to love your neighbor as yourself with your whole heart, mind, and soul. So this is an extremely important topic today. And I was just praying myself to cleanse me from this telling falsehoods, even when you don't mean to, or even repeating something you think is true, but actually it isn't.
It's interesting how when somebody spouts off about somebody else, it really is revealing what is within them.
Well, and that's the stupidity of the human mind. It projects on others what it believes to be true about itself. Exactly.
Yeah, and that is often why, people do project their sins, what they are doing wrong, because it's in their thought. And I'm speaking humanly right at the moment. They project it on other people and say they're doing it. They do it for many reasons, mainly because their own faults have blinded them and they think it is in other people, or they're casting the first stone before the stone gets cast on them. It's planned.
Do unto others before they do unto you.
That's right. Absolutely. I read this poem. Who steals my purse steals trash, but he who filches from my good name robs me that which not enriches him, yet leaves me poor indeed.
Oh.
So this is serious business, because many lives have seemed to have been ruined by this. And it is a plot of error to accuse people and bring them down falsely. Yes. Whoever bears false witness is aligning himself with Satan, the devil. It's a plot of the devil. And Revelation 12 goes into it. refers to Satan as the accuser of our brethren.
which deceiveth the whole world.
Yes. And what happens to these liars? I mean, there's a list in Revelation 12, I think it is, but they get cast into what?
Is that the lake of fire?
Yes, it is. That is the lake. Yes.
Night without a star.
Yes. And this, my friends, this was Mrs. Evans' original watch message. And she would say anyone or anything that would try to interfere with God's work in the Plainfield Church, but I always expand it now to our, you can say your home, your community, your nation, your world. And it's a safe prayer because whoever would try to interfere with God's work, and that can be by lying, absolutely. They will be cast into a lake of fire and a night without a star. It's time we get this plumb line working. In ancient times, I was reading, in Egypt, the false witnesses were punished by amputation of nose and ears. In Rome, they were hurled headlong from the Tarpeian Rock. I didn't know what that was, but it's a steep cliff, 80 feet high, and it was an execution site. If people didn't obey themselves, they were hurled off the cliff. So, but the point is, this is a serious crime. And in America, and hopefully other nations, I don't know, I can only speak for America, what perjury?
Yeah.
Is what? Subject to the law.
It's illegal.
It's illegal. You're not to get a, yes.
It's punishable.
That's why no one should get away with it.
No one should. And that's a problem today, too. It's things have seemed to be, getting out of control where people are getting away with it. Or the poor person who doesn't have all the money or the strings attached, they get accused and thrown into jail while the ones with all the money and the strings attached don't. God's law of divine justice is in full and complete operation. The wicked shall not go unpunished. Mike?
I was going to say, boy, that's the absolute truth, what you just said there. It comes down to money, and it makes one wonder how a lawyer can defend a person knowing 100%, like with these whole opioid things. I mean, these people are going to end up, cause the whole problem, are going to end up with billions of dollars in the end. But the thing that is said here very much at Plainfield is that not to shy away from naming the truth. So we're not doing our neighbor any good if we let them get away with something that's illegal, and it doesn't necessarily mean going to the law or confronting them, even if we pray about it. That's exonerating us from being an accessory to whatever they're doing.
Well, that's right, because you can be a bear false witness of your neighbor by your silence, by not saying the truth. And this is where, again, Christian Scientists get so super fuzzy on this. Let me backtrack to the fact when I say throwing in a lake of fire night without a star or will not go unpunished. What am I talking about? Am I talking about people necessarily?
No.
No.
The error destroys itself.
The error will destroy itself. If the person hangs on to that error, he might seem to go through some difficult times, and well, he should. Mrs. Eddy says that too. The design of love is to what?
Reform the sinner.
Reform. So where the Christian Scientists get fuzzy on this is, I mustn't say anything. God's love. Don't speak a word. So atrocities are being committed, and so-called Christian Scientists have their lips zipped.
That's accessory to the event.
Yes.
You allow it to happen. It goes on unresisted. It's sin.
It is a sin. Who is telling of the foe in ambush? And I was that way. Oh my goodness. between that and then my mother's Southern upbringing and being kind and loving, and I love to be kind and loving, but it has to be with a sword. And because I was that way, I was so miserable. I wasn't speaking up when I should. It's an awful way to live because it's not godlike. We wield the sword of truth. On the other hand, this doesn't mean we go around just talking and exposing everybody's errors and just taking great delight in that either. And that's where it gets abused in the other direction. It has to be only through divine guidance and spiritual sense can you know and discern when it needs to be addressed and spoken to and when perhaps it doesn't.
Right. The one thing that will screw things up is personal sense. If you take any of this personally, if you assign any of this to person, you will screw it up. We're talking about beliefs, false beliefs, errors. So when we expose an error in someone, we do it out of love for them. And we're not responsible for them. We're responsible for bringing error out from hiding.
This is in the Bible. It talks about the Matthew Code, which I had heard of before, a long time ago. And so you don't have to hurt someone. You can go to them. You're not there with the sword to chop them up. You can go to them and speak. And then if that doesn't seem to rectify the situation in any way, you could go with somebody else. And then you get help.
Thank you. And that's biblical. And, for instance, if you are having, we were taught this here, a problem in the neighborhood, maybe with loud music or barking dogs or something, you first go to them, the neighbors, and tell them. And if you don't want to show your face, which, I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you don't, you can always leave a note and say, I'm your neighbor, your dogs won't stop barking. You can do it a few times. And then you can say, I will go to the police if I have to. And then you do that. But you always do it out of love and out of kindness. But this is the plumb line. And those of you who don't know the plumb line, you'll have to go back to our Amos Bible studies. But it's God's standard. And once you let your standard drop, then you have nothing left. And Mike talked about the opioids and everything. Well, now these companies are being sued. I've read about that. Many of them are settling privately because they don't want it to go to trial. But people are rising up against error. And it might seem like tumultuous times, but that's a good thing. Yes, the error might seem rampant, but people are rising up in rebellion against it. And is Joe on? No. Well, Joe, if you're listening, get on the telephone for a minute, because she sent me something about personal sense and what Mrs. Eddy said. I should have brought it, but I didn't. It was something she'd seen in one of the books she was typing. How it was maybe Lydia.
Lydia.
No, lead us from temptation. And she said that. Okay, Joe, can you give us that quote? About personal sense that you sent me.
Oh, it was from the 6 Days of Revelation on page 47. It was Mrs. Eddy's classroom prayer that she gave out, and it was the Lord's Prayer and the spiritual interpretation. It was very different from what we have now. But the last line where the student says, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." And then Mrs. Glover interpreted it by saying, "And lead man into soul and deliver him from personal sense."
Thank you. Personal sense she equated with evil. And in the first edition, she goes over and over and over. We once had a man in our church who was going to count all the time she talked about personal sense in the first edition. The personal sense is what ties people's hands and gets everybody all mixed up. And it's the do-goody sense. We must be loving, and all this political correctness that it gets ridiculous. You can't even speak the truth about the lie, or you get a $250 fine, as they're doing in New York City.
$250,000 fine.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, really. It's absurd.
It's absurd. You can look that up. I won't go into it. But anyway, and what is this? It's an era's ploy to get your hands tied under the guise of being loving. Well, you have to call a spade a spade. Jesus, when he rebuked, he just let it rip, so to speak. So thank you for that quote, Joe. And it's so important because personal sense is what does it. And the organizational Christian Scientists, that's how they view things. That's how they view things politically, because I've heard from them, some of them. And they're offended. They get offended by what I say. How dare you say anything? Well, I will. And if you don't want to listen, that's your right. Andrew Hartsook wrote an amazing banner, which I got yesterday, which I'm going to read from tomorrow at the round table. But anyway, I wanted to clarify this bearing false witness, what it is and what it isn't. When it's vicious and malicious to bring a person down and it's hateful, then the person that's doing it is going to be in that. That doesn't stop us from speaking the truth. Okay.
And that's what, that is what is wrong with personal sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because personal sense is the wrong way to look at anything. I think the guy that counted personal sense in the first edition came up, it on average, it appears once on every page.
Close to that.
But Mrs. Eddy couldn't have been more strong on denouncing personal sense as opposed to our true sense, which is spiritual sense, our consciousness. Because personal sense will always see everything incorrectly, and as a result, it will always do the wrong thing to try to correct things that it considers to be wrong.
I was thinking, if you see something and God directs you to speak up and you don't, that's a sin of omissions.
Thank you.
And then you're going to pay the penalty because you were disobedient.
Yes.
I was thinking something like that last night, actually, that, my mom acted like she was the witness for God in my life, and she pulled me in lots of false directions. And so I was just thinking how important it is that we witness for God in a truthful manner and not get in over our heads or anything.
Well, that's true too. And that is a very wrong thing. And that's what I'm also saying, that extreme where you're going around. And Christians have done great damage when they'll say, well, God wants this, or God. I had a dear friend, I think I talked about a week or so ago, she was going to join a certain religious group. And when she met with the
Pastor, the minister.
Yeah, the minister. First he said that he didn't think animals had any, spirituality about them. And then he said something like, all Jews are going to go to hell. So she said, well, thank you very much. I'm never coming back here again. And then they say that like it's a God-given testimony, and it is not. So here we go with weeding out facts from fiction.
And that is totally personal sense, totally human. There's nothing divine about it. So for someone to attach God's name to it is a sin.
Yes, that's blasphemy, and that's one of the commandments. Thou shalt not take the Lord thy God in vain. That's why these sessions are so important, so we understand what in the world it's talking about, and how deep these go. These truths go in the inward parts. The truth goes into your inward parts, as we talked about Sunday. And the 10 Commandments, Sermon on the Mount, let them go into your inward parts to purify.
And then Mrs. Eddy says her interpretation of this commandment is love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. See the spiritual idea. And then Mr. Morgan, John L. Morgan, in his notes on true vision, and when we're doing it correctly, this is what happens. I look with the eye of spiritual innocency and behold no evil, for we are the divine presence. I behold man in love and blot out all sense of imperfection, all fear and dislike. I look with the eye of love's benevolence and behold in man all the hues and qualities of God.
Thank you. I love that pamphlet.
You too.
Perfect.
Yeah. It's really great because some testimonies I read, it was because when people have eye problems, they can't see, vision getting blurred, it's something they didn't want to see. And that in thought, it was what was, I guess, blurring their vision. So that to see through the divine vision is just wonderful. You wrote a great thing.
Thank you.
I read this morning, I was reading No Malpractice by Martha Wilcox. And if I could just read this little paragraph, it discusses what we're talking about here, how we have to love our neighbor as ourselves. And she says, all things of which we are conscious, even though appearing as the experience of someone else, are as much our experience as theirs, and as little their experience as ours, and must be handled this way. When we clearly recognize what thou seest, thou beest, this fact will heal all criticism, all condemnation, and self-righteousness that we may be harboring in our thought.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, this is what heals, because you can see someone and the more you grow in science, the more you are aware of people's errors. And it's not because you're looking for them or you're a clairvoyant. It just comes to you. But in that coming, it also shows that it's an untruth about them. It's not the truth about them at all. And you can love them as a child of God, but you are relentless on the error that has bound them and enslaved them, just as you would be if it comes to your own thought. And this is the clear vision. And that booklet is wonderful. I love it. True Vision. Thank you both all. So, and maybe Carol's listening, right? Carol,
Yes.
Find in the beginning of Spiritual Footsteps, the very, very beginning, what Mrs. Eddy says when she's talking to everyone on Pleasant View. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. When you see sin in others, you know that you have it in yourselves. Repent.
There you are. Well, thank you, Bruce.
Gold star, Bruce.
No, there's a- but
Yes, thank you.
very sobering, that beginning, which she said at Pleasant View. Here they were all coming, oh wow, we're going to see our leaders, and that's great. And then she really gets up there and she pretty much reams them out in some ways. I mean, in a loving way, she's speaking the truth, but she's making sure their feet are on the ground and they're not just all ecstatic about the time.
Just thank God we have this unauthorized literature and we have these words from our leader. I don't know if I would have gotten it or anything like it without something like this available.
No. And we should actually, it's worth taking a minute to talk about this sentence that Bruce just repeated, to make sure we get everything out of it. When you see sin in others, in other words, when you attach sin to the person and see the person as a sinful person,
Mm-hmm.
then you've got it in yourself, because you see yourself as something separate from God. And then she says, repent. Well, change the base of your thought. See both yourself and others as God's creation. Respect that. Love it. And then when you see sin, you won't see it in others. You will see it as a mistake, as a mistaken belief, which truth can and will destroy.
And that makes all the difference. Thank you very much. Yes.
It must be done all over.
Yes.
All over, really, not just for some people. I like what Spurgeon says. He says that one can take the commandments and then just go through them one at a time and look within yourself and see if you're breaking any of them. It's helpful.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes. So it's important that we exercise this on ourselves. And you see, people who are full of negativity and condemn themselves, they condemn others too, rather than clarify their thought through the process that Gary just mentioned, and know that you're condemning yourself, you're condemning what God has made. If you are sinning, well, you condemn the sin, you ask for his repentance, you make any necessary changes or reforms, you get on your knees to God and to anyone you might have harmed. We call it clearing your slate. Once you've done that sincerely, you can leave that all behind. You put off that old sense of man for the new. And then you can get on with your life. But if you continue to condemn yourself after you've done that, well, what is that?
Pride.
A form of pride.
Thank you. It's a form of pride.
It's one of the worst sins.
Yes. And
because then it becomes a sin against God. You're condemning his creation.
Yes, you're separating yourself totally from God, and that certainly doesn't do any good for you or anyone who's around you.
No, that's right. It's a selfish indulgence if you continue it. And as we've talked about, what would Saul have been? I mean, here he was killing Christians. He had a lot to repent for, but he did. And then he went on to become Paul and did tremendous works. So if this keeps tormenting you, that's the accuser day and night. That's Satan, who deceives everyone. He's accusing you, he's tormenting you day and night. And as Luann said in her testimony, what will be the result of it? Is Luann on? Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. What did I say to you that would be the result of it if you didn't get over this? It would stop your what?
I don't remember.
Okay, well, you testified on Wednesday. You said it would stop your testimony, and that's what it always wants.
It was definitely, when it was going on and stuff, it was definitely just pulling me away from God, and I was getting caught all up in it, and I was afraid that it was going to steal my testimony.
Yes, and let's see, the devil would love that. Oh, I'm just going to condemn you and accuse you day and night. So you have good to do for God. Well, gosh, you won't be able to do it. You'll think, wow, who am I? What should I? Oh, look at all the terrible things. I can't say anything. I can't give a testimony. I can't do anything. I. And so it goes. And that the devil says, ha, 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 ha. It's got you. So to that you say, the hell you say. If you've overcome whatever regrets, someone was asking me about regrets recently, whatever regrets, whatever is your past has been wrong, you've gone through the process of pond and purpose, then you go ahead with your head high and don't let error steal your testimony. That's why the testimony meetings in churches that haven't been taught properly are dead silent. Just what error wants. And error is not a person, place, or thing. We give it the power it has. So when you allow it to do that, you're giving it all that power. It has no power on its own, and you've given it to it. And so in your thinking have created a reality, but it's a delusion, a false reality. It's not the truth. But as long as you continue to worship that false god, you will continue to be a miserable person for the rest of your life. Anybody else? I wanted to read to you Proverbs 6:6-19, where he says, 16-19.
Okay, Proverbs. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imagination, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren.
Now, a lot of those have to do with lying, don't they?
Yeah.
Not all of them. So
when things like that are brought up from the Bible, you see why they want to shut it down and get rid of it.
Thank you. Yes, they do. They don't want you to know this. They want to get rid of the plumb line, so we'll just be all in a state of confusion about what is right and what isn't.
Well, that's a very good point. You can bet that those who try to take the Bible out of schools, try to take the Bible out of our government, try to take the Bible out of anywhere, are those who are guilty of one of these 7, at least one.
Like these sowing discord among the brethren.
Yeah, and and they are pitiable people who want to take the Bible. They are used for wickedness, but as people, they are pitiable.
It's just as wicked to, claim the Bible and then behave a certain way that is so contrary to it. It turns people off.
Exactly.
So if you're ever given any bit of gossip or something like that, and usually they don't want you to say anything or just maybe pass it on to others to spread the rumors. You make sure it stops with you. I remember a little while ago, and this person really isn't, I wouldn't call her a Christian Scientist, but it was someone who comes to church. She wrote a letter about somebody else, and there were just all these falsehoods in there. So it was an offense to me, and I scream it from the rooftops. We got it taken care of in the manner that Shardy said. You go to the person. You don't write somebody behind their back about it, unless you do that to Gary or I or anyone else in this church. Don't think it's going to go as a secret. It will not. And we had it totally resolved because we did it this way. We're not going to have division among the brethren. Absolutely not.
Actually, a great blessing came from it too. So.
A great blessing came from it. Further growth and adjustments that needed to be made. But that sort of thing sticks out like a sore thumb here.
Yes, it does. And we have Mrs. Evans to thank for that.
We do.
I remember when I very first got here, Mrs. Evans says, we got a couple of rules here. Oh, really? And one of them is you don't badmouth people behind their back. No gossiping. It was a rule. Boy, it made you think.
It does. And if you can't say something directly to the person, then please don't say it behind their back. If you can say it directly to the person and they're not getting it and you need to alert people, well, that's different. But all this talking behind people's back, there was a list of things, the way you can bear false witness.
The reason why it's a golden rule.
Yes. This commentary says when you commit perjury, and what is perjury?
Lying under oath.
Under oath. Says you are in effect calling upon God to witness your lie. Whoa. You know what is going to happen if you even think about doing that.
Again, a reason why they want to put their hand on a different book.
Yes,
these days,
when you're sworn in, they don't want to put your hand on the Bible. A few people have gotten other books to swear in on. Sorry, Bible is it. And we're not going to be do-goody about this. There's a reason. So, talks about flattery. Flattery is a form of lying when you don't mean what you say. Why do people flatter?
Manipulate.
They want
make themselves better than they are.
They want something in return.
False teachers, false teaching. This is why you have to know the Bible. You have to know science and how prose works, so you know when you hear something that's untrue. Careless lies, where you're taking lightly, maybe joking about something that's not true, that would be slanderous. Of course, the little white lies. Speaking out of context. Taking something someone said out of context to
And don't we see that going on big time right now in our own Congress?
Yeah.
And then mixing the lies with half-truths. That's a real, because they will say something that's maybe a smidgen truth, but then they elaborate on it, or anyone, myself included, you can elaborate on it and make it sound like it's the gospel truth, and it is not. It's not what the person meant. It's not really what the person said. It's twisted. That's why I usually like to go back and hear exactly what the person said and not take it out of context, the whole thing.
The one thing that I noticed when I went to court over my roof is that when we got sworn in, we didn't swear on the Bible. They didn't even have a Bible in the courtroom. And the other guy, when he was up there testifying, he lied through the whole thing. And he swore to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and he sat up there and lied through the whole thing.
Did they say something to God?
No, they didn't say God at all.
Wow.
I had to keep knowing that he was there in the courtroom.
If we put your hand on the Bible, then, sorry if you haven't finished.
No, I was just saying that I had to know that God was there with me, even though they didn't recognize him at all.
Wow. Goes back to what Linda spoke in the very beginning, that there's really no truth with a capital T, and lying is certainly okay. What are you teaching your children, and how are you as an example? But that is really not good, Luann. See what's seeping through our government, our nation, our world, as the Bible is being ruled out of it. That's why may God's word enrich the affections of all mankind and govern them. Daily prayer. Mary Baker Eddy. Well, good for you that you were there bringing the truth. And your truth is a capital T, and it outrules all negative truths, untruths. There's no such thing. It's
all the lies.
All the lies, yes. And there was and this is certainly true, and our founding fathers have said similar things, that no society will endure, nor will any relationship that is not founded in truth. It cannot. It will not endure. How could? And then I love this. This was Winston Churchill. He accused someone in Parliament, and he accused them of perpetuating a terminological inexactitude. So he found life. Go ahead.
Matthew Henry warns against bearing false witness in equivocating, which is using language that deceives and is misleading.
Yes, thank you very much.
But I think it must be quite a nerving thing for you to put your hand on the Bible and then lie. That must shake you, I feel.
Yes.
That the power, I mean, what it just would show what you think of the Bible. Is this just some laws? Is God present in His Word? So.
Yes, thank you.
What's interesting is how powerful God's truth is, because sometimes I watch these little clips of them interviewing one of these politicians or whatever, and they ask them a question which has been probably asked 1 million times, and yet the look that comes over the person's face, and they come up with some answer that makes absolutely no sense. It's just quite fascinating. It's self-incrimination, what I see.
Yeah.
I think it was either Bicknell Young or Gilbert Carpenter said, if you let someone talk for half an hour, it'll be all error.
Well, I like this little poem too. A good thing to remember and a better thing to do is to work with the construction gang and not with the wrecking crew. So that means, to build up, to see the good, to acknowledge good wherever you go, and to build that up and to give that credit and not
tear down,
not be tearing down others. Look for the good. Look what unites us instead of what divides us. And there's always things that unite us. So.
And I love that seeing error as a mistake and not in the person puts you on the same side with that person, against the error. So.
Yeah.
Right.
That United Front article. It was on the carousel anyway.
Yes.
Right. And the reason that it has power is because that is what God created. That is what is true. We are on the same side.
Thank you.
Some people know it more than others.
And that is the power, because it is the one and only power that will lift us up to seeming, such a mess. And it can do it quickly because it's the one truth. We'll raise the standard. It'll bring the plumb line back, and things will adjust themselves. Now, I think it's 11, but before we close, I think we've discussed if you have been bearing false witness, what you can do. Get yourself right with God and your fellow man. You can study the word so you know it better, so you don't get off track. Just work on yourself. But what would you do if you seem to be the victim? I don't like to use that word, but victim of someone bearing false witness. Because I'm sure we've all had it. And Luann, you want to talk to this? Said you've had it. You're having it, it seems.
Yeah, one thing I just kept repeating to myself in court is that I knew that the truth would set me free. So all I could speak was the truth. And I had to keep knowing that the judge would discern the truth from the lie throughout the whole court proceeding. It was very unnerving to see this guy, just sitting there lying, and I don't know. It was really difficult for me. But I did after a while, like the next day and stuff, when I went over things that I should have said and I would have, could have said and all this stuff, then that started eating me up. But I knew I had to keep knowing that I told the truth and that the Lord is my judge, which is a line that you gave me from the Bible. And I have to keep knowing, even though people keep telling me, oh, you're going to lose this case, you're going to lose this case, that this judge has the mind of God and a consciousness to discern the truth from the lie. And we haven't got anything back from the court yet. We're still waiting on it. And I'm hoping that this judge is really, thinking about it and discerning the truth and will judge rightly. But, to keep myself from letting it eat me up, and waiting and waiting and waiting for the results. That's the hard part. But it's good training. It's a good lesson to pray without ceasing, like you spoke about on the last meeting. And this is a really good lesson for me to keep fighting this, stay above it, keep staying above it, no matter what anybody says.
It's wonderful. That's absolutely true. I don't know whether any of us here have not experienced this. I know when I had experienced it, that is what I did too. I kept knowing, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the truth would be made evident. If it's not right away, it will. It can't help. And also the error goes back on itself to destroy itself, especially if someone is maliciously trying to spread rumors about you. We wield a mighty sword in this truth. And woe be to anybody that tries to come in and fool around with it. Woe be, do mine anointed no harm. We have all these truths, biblical and science and health, to keep us on the right path. And think of all the examples, because the ultimate lie was made upon Christ Jesus, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, always that.
And look at the everlasting victory he had. So it will always be.
I think the hardest part for me was when the lawyer said that I was trying to scam this guy out of a free roof. I mean, that spoke to my character and my whole being, and that was really hard to hear, that this lawyer would say that to the judge. The last couple of weeks, I went up on the roof and stripped off all the metal that this guy put on, stripped the roof down. We got it all new water barrier on there. I built a new front porch, which the guy built all wrong and wasn't to code. He had put the roof over 3 layers of shingles, which is against code, so the whole roof had to come off. And I've been doing it for the last 2 weeks. I had to get up there and do it myself.
Well, and God knows the righteous, and he preserves the righteous man, maintains and cares for them, and that's all you need to know. And it doesn't matter what is said about you. It's what you do about it. It's what you do about it, because people will slander. They slandered Mrs. Eddy. Anybody that does anything, they'll slander. Era will. Again, never person, but think of the prophets, what they went through. Daniel and the lion.
Jesus.
Well, Jesus, I said, was the ultimate, and he overcame it. So shall we end on something positive?
And the most important thing, if you are a victim, appear to be a victim of something like this, is never hate.
Yes.
Never return evil with hatred. Love more. God loves us.
As Reg Carey says, you love the hell out of them. And that's because they won't be able to find you. The only way they find you, if you start malpracticing, and that's the whole purpose of it. You start hating, that era will find you. You don't hate, you don't resent, you don't churn around with it. You rise above it and know that leave God to take care of the battlefield.
And whatever the circumstance, whether it's in court or in a family or in a business, nobody wins an argument. So don't drop down to the level of the evil. Don't argue with it. As Luann said, rise above it and know that the truth is always the victor.
Truth is always the victor. Yes, no victims in God's kingdom. Impossible. So Wonderful Bible study. Thank you
Thank you.
very
Well,
much.
thank
Thank you, Shadi.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More coveting coming up.
And probably Amos is next.
Amos is next.
Amos, yeah.
Yeah, coveting's going to be the new year.
Wow.